Sir, if you could begin by telling us how many battalions are deployed and in which places across India currently?
Well, how the NDRF works is that we have 12 battalions in place. They are pan-India, across India, in different geographies. And out of the battalions, teams are made out, 18 teams per battalion. So right now, as we speak, more than 160 teams are deployed. Only a few days ago, 190 plus teams were deployed because it was multiple situations across the country, mainly in the peninsular part of India. So just to come back to your point, right now more than 160 teams are deployed. Some of them are in the withdrawal mode because situation has improved significantly. But then they are also doing relief and rescue simultaneously. So 160 plus.
Okay. So, since floods are a recurring phenomena in many parts of India, you may have prior information of when they're going to strike. How do you deploy your personnel? Do you get information from some weather departments, or the states call you in, or do you monitor it yourself?
Well, to start with, I'd flag the point that disaster management is a state subject. But then the national institutions of the disaster management ecosystem, including the National Disaster Management Authority, which is chaired by the Prime Minister, the NDRF, which is a standalone force just focused on disaster response, etc., are working overtime in whenever disaster strikes. One of the institutions or the group of institutions is under the Ministry of Earth Sciences, and also the water related institutions like the Central Water Commission. So a combination of those institutions are working very closely with us. To name a few, the Indian Meteorological Department, IMD, which is in the business of predicting and forecasting. They do a very professional job, and I must say in the last few years, they have been outstanding in their predictions. So IMD gives us the predictions of rainfall, of cyclones, etc., etc. As far as flooding is concerned, about the river systems, the CWC, the Central Water Commission, tells us about the flooding situations, where the rivers are spating, where the rivers are going above the danger mark, etc. Then there are other institutions, the Indian INCOIS is based out of Hyderabad, and the Earthquake Prediction Center, again based out of Hyderabad. The ISRO and the NRSA being the space research agencies, they all combine. So we get inputs from all of them on a real-time basis, and that kind of gives us the body of information or the predictive information on which we act. So that is the reason why we are able to act probably in a better time frame, and probably in the first few hours, which are the golden hours in a disaster response scenario. But having said that, apart from these central institutions, the states have a very important role, because as I said in the beginning, the disaster response role is for the state, and the disaster management as a portfolio belongs to the state. So they have to also play their role, and they play their role now more effectively, I think, as the time is going by. And in the recent floods, for example, the states got to us very quickly, so that we could pre-position teams. So since pre-positioning is an essential part of the response, in fact a vital part of the response, if we are pre-positioned in a certain place at a certain time, then the response becomes that much better. That is happening. So I think everything is now converging very nicely in India, and the states are realizing their responsibility and how they have to collaborate with the central agencies, and vice versa. The central agencies realize the role of the state. Agencies like the Air Force, etc., are also coming to the picture. The Army coming into the picture. So I think it's a combination of stakeholders which is holding it together. And yes, probably there is a case for even better coordination as time goes by. But that is really happening, and I must say that it's a very happy situation, that because of more and more experience of coordination, better coordination is a result, and right. that is bound to improve in the time to come.
That would have been my other question about whether there's room for improvement. We also believe the NDRF is a fairly young force.
Yeah.
It was formed in 2006. So with
Yes.
every experience, they're learning. So my next question would be, what kind of resources does the NDRF have equipment-wise? Is it all state-of-the-art?
I would not say it would be state of the art because the equipment inventory which was crystallized was done about a decade ago. But then, having said that, I would say that the list of 310 equipment, which was kind of finalized a decade ago, still holds very good. I may add that there may be some further requirement in terms of quality and quantity. For example, suppose we have so many number of X equipment for a cyclone situation. Given the experience over the last decade, we may think that there may be more numbers that could be added. Then qualitatively, because of technology ramping up, maybe the same equipment is of a much better quality now, but the authorization which is of the last quality has to be now upgraded. So we are already on to that process, and the government is very, very seized of the matter and sympathetic towards it. And I'm sure that reauthorization is also around the corner. So we are in the process of ramping up both quality and quantity of our equipment. But again, I must reiterate that the inventory of 310 equipment was a world standard at that time. It was taken from the UN, and I think the NDRF has probably one of the best equipment inventories among disaster response forces in the world. I would like to also flag one very interesting fact that NDRF is itself a world-class force because it undertakes and follows protocols which are the world standard. So not only the equipment world standard, the practices of using the equipment are also world standard. And the USP of the NDRF teams are that each member of the team is a multi-skilled rescuer and a responder. Not only is a medical first responder, he's also good at collapse structure rescue. He's also good at aquatic disaster rescue. He's also good at CBR and the chemical, biological, radiological, nuclear rescue. So this is the USP of NDRF. It is unique in the world because every person is a very good medical first responder and can do a pre-hospital treatment of a person to stabilize a heart patient, get deliveries done on the boat. This has happened. So this makes it a unique force, and the USP of that NDRF is probably its mainstay.
Right, sir. In fact, the NDRF has been applauded for its work done abroad as well. If you can tell us a little bit about that.
Well, two assignments across the world are standouts. The first assignment was in 2011 in Japan, where there was a triple disaster. It was an earthquake, tsunami, and followed by a nuclear leakage. And I must tell you that while one team went from India, among other teams which had come internationally, when the nuclear leakage happened, NDRF was one of the few teams which stayed back to deal with even the nuclear leakage. So just to strengthen the point that I was telling you earlier, that the average NDRF rescuer is good at even aquatic disasters as well as equally good at handling a nuclear disaster. So because of that, we got a lot of encomiums in Japan. It was not only in the media, but Mr. Shinzo Abe, who was again the Prime Minister at that time also, specifically hailed the effort of NDRF very publicly. And, they were also felicitated here when the Emperor and the Empress came to Delhi. The NDRF team was specifically called to the Japanese embassy here in Delhi, and they were again felicitated. So, I mean, that was a very, very good example of international standard cooperation and also delivery from the NDRF teams. The second was the Nepal earthquake, where again NDRF was one of the earliest to arrive and probably the last to leave. And they did the gamut of rescue and relief as well as the restoration part, and that was a very very massive exercise. And again, the NDRF teams were the standout among all the international teams, and the Nepalese acknowledged that.
So the NDRF has been, currently it's deployed in these places that are facing floods, and it's been over several weeks, maybe nearly a month in some places, I believe. How does the force keep up its strength? Do you rotate them regularly?
I think the experience has been the best teacher. Let me take the example of the Cyclone Phony. Cyclone Phony had one of the highest deployments ever in a single incident of disaster in a single state. That was Odisha. We had upwards of 50 teams of NDRF deployed there. And obviously there was a lot of stress and strain because they were working almost round the clock without let up. So we have found out our ways and means of kind of giving them less stress by rotating the personnel from within the team. So out of the, say, suppose 50 teams are working, each of the teams is about 47 to 50 personnel. And probably then we subdivide and make it 3 sub-teams so that when 2 teams are working, 1 team is resting. And that rotation. So this is one. And the second is, of course, I must tell you that it is not always that kind of a situation that you can rest at all, any one of the personnel, because the crisis is of that scale. So in that case, they work really full time, and I must say that they have learned to absorb that kind of a stress. Sometimes it gets a little bit overwhelming. They fall ill. It can be stressful at times, mentally also. But then I think they have adapted very well. Let me remind you that they are all ex paramilitary personnel. They have probably dealt with situations which are life or death situations. They have worked in Naxal areas, insurgency areas, and against terrorists. So they are adapted. They are used to some kind of a stress. But this is a different ball game altogether. But I think that is carried onto this job also, and they adapt faster. So far, I would say that they have done a wonderful job at adaptation. So full marks to them. But yes, it's a concern that we are addressing also by and by.
So you earlier told us about how the NDRF has, I mean, there are reports about their exemplary work, how they're multi-talented, multi-skilled rather, and they've delivered on boats in disaster areas. So does the NDRF sometimes, do the personnel go out of their way to rescue distressed people, provide them relief?
Absolutely. In fact, if I may say it in a word or in a sentence, it's a never say no to nothing kind of an approach. Never say no to nothing. We have, I think in the last week or 10 days, you would have had a very fascinating news of crocodiles being rescued by the NDRF. I mean, that was never part of the manifesto of the job. Goats have been rescued. Pet dogs have been rescued, because it's about, our motto is saving life and beyond, and it does not qualify human life. It does not say human life. Any life that can be saved, any property that can be saved, anything that brings the person out of distress, a family out of distress, is for us something to be done. And we go that extra mile to do it. That's why it's a no limits kind of a job, as long as you provide that kind of a relief and assurance to the person. Suppose a family person says that only this pet dog is good enough for me to be taken, and that will take care of my life. Well, we have done that in Karnataka. This is exactly what happened. It was a couple who were in a bad shape. They just wanted the pet dog to be taken with some personal effects, and that is what we did. And they thanked us, thanked the team as if they were God's gift to them. These are very humane kind of situations. We go through these situations almost on a daily basis in crisis times. But I must compliment my men that they have learned to accept the fact that there are no outer limits. There are no no-go situations that you don't do this and you don't do. There's no protocol like that. As long as the person rescued is satisfied and he gets that relief mentally and physically, we'll go the distance.
So, of course, the NDRF, like you said, they are brought in from different forces. They are all ex-paramilitary service men and women. And they have been through many stressful times. They have faced life and death situations. But still, the job of the NDRF is slightly different, considering they're rescuing civilians. And with that, there's an emotional attachment as well.
Yes.
So how do they perform their duties and remain emotionally detached?
I don't think they remain detached in that sense. They get emotionally affected. I mean, we had situations where a very poor old woman kept bending down to thank a few NDRF boys, holding their hands and not letting go. And the boys were emotionally overwhelmed because it was like an old mother trying to, thank them. So it is not as if we don't get emotionally affected. We do. Recently, people were very, emotionally overwhelmed because a whole village, the girls and the women of that village tied Rakhi to them. And, it was a situation where they knew that they could not go home for Rakhi. So it was a very touching kind of situation. So it is not easy to, take that thing out of your system. The emotion does overwhelm. But they try to be as calm as possible because they have to get on to the next job. But yes, I have told my boys that emotion is part of this, because only if you feel overwhelmed sometimes, you will also overwhelm others emotionally, because that is how, emotional bonding is more important than just a professional bonding. You are not going to save a person and not feel emotion. And it is not as if the person saved is not going to feel emotion. This is what has happened across geographies in our experience, especially in the last floods. There has been so much of emotional outpouring from the public. And NDRF boys have been actually hailed as next to God, that they have come and saved. It can be overwhelming, but I think that is part of the package, and I think we go with it. We accept it in our stride, take it in our stride. Sometimes it brings tears to your eyes, sometimes it brings tears of happiness, but that's part of the game.
And lastly, a more question about your motto is to act and train. So, of course, the action is taken care of by the NDRF. But what about the training? How many training camps do you undertake, and how important is that in disaster management?
Well, training is like building capacity on a daily basis, and we take that very seriously. So, as you said, either we are operating or we are training. So, we have a O&T model, O or T model. We are either operating or training. So, when we are not operating, out of the 365 days in a year, suppose we are operating on 100 days, I can assure you the rest of the 265 days, each of the days, the boys are up to something. They are training. Either they are training themselves, or they are training the community. They are training school children. They are training college, boys, college students, or they are doing what is called mock drills with various stakeholders. So, just to sum it up, there is hardly a day in a year where they are either operating or training, either operating or training. They are always in a action mode, and this training hones their skill. It actually is real-time capacity building. And we must remember that almost every year there is an attrition. Maybe about 15 to 20% finish their tenure in NDRF and go back to their respective forces. So there are new people, new NDRF rescuers who have come on board, and they also have to be trained. And then there is another very critical role, capacity building role that NDRF plays, is to train the state forces. As I said, disaster management is a state subject. The state has to deal with deal with it first up. So we train what are the SDRFs, for example, the state disaster responsible, which are the counterpart of NDRF in the states. Then where the SDRFs are not there, or even if they are there, there is a civil defense which is also strapped with the responsibility of doing some part of a disaster response. So the civil defense is trained, the home guards is trained, even the normal police is trained so that they have some disaster response skills. So it is a very big portfolio for capacity building that we handle across the board, not only our training, but training of the states, training of the community, training of the student population. It's a massive mandate, and we take that very seriously because we never forget that the best responder in a disaster situation is the community. It's the primary responder. So unless we have an empowered, trained, aware community, our role will always be very overwhelming, very challenging. The challenge will reduce only when we strengthen the community and empower the community. And that is our business. And that is something that we want to really evangelize in a very strong way over the next few years, so that more and more community people, even volunteers, can take up this role. And I think I'll be happy to share with you that with the Ministry of Sports and Youth Affairs, we are taking up this very ambitious project of training the NYKS volunteers, the Nehru Yuva Kendra volunteers, in disaster response. So that while they are doing their normal things, NYK related schedule, annual calendar, they are also basic disaster volunteers who are certified in some way. So when a disaster actually strikes, we are able to tap them. Maybe call them up while the NDRF team is preparing to go, call them up and say, please do these basic things while we reach you. So they are from the community and they can make a difference to the community.